Hello everyone, I'm Bruffy1322 and this video will showcase the fastest cars in the GTA 5 HSW subclass, organised first of all by race tier and then by lap time within each tier, with the top speed of each vehicle also shown in order to identify any outliers. All 23 HSW cars have been put through their paces on my testing track and top speed run, and we'll be going from the slowest G tier cars to the top S tier in this video. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on future testing of new vehicles added to GTA 5 and beyond, and check out all of the classes in the playlist. This video is supported by my wonderful channel members here on YouTube. Click the join button below the video to directly support the channel and find out all the perks you can get by doing so, including early access to videos and having your name listed at the end of each video. As we see some of the slowest HSW cars, which are still bloody quick to be honest, it's important for me to let you know that the intro video to this series, which is linked in the description and pinned comment, likely answers any questions you have about this testing. From simple things like what car upgrades are needed to maximise performance and what HSW stands for, to more complicated things like why I use off-road wheels and overall testing methodologies. Give that video a watch if there's anything you don't understand here, since everything there is assumed knowledge for this video. So, only available on PS5 and Xbox Series consoles, in order to entice people on those platforms to increase the player base for GTA 6's release, which will also only be on those platforms initially. HSW stands for How Special Works and constitutes upgrades to specific cars in the Los Santos car meet. Cars that are given these HSW upgrades are largely characterised with having much higher top speeds than normal cars, and often sit towards the top of their respective classes due to their impressive performance overall, as you've already seen even with the slowest HSW cars here, although they don't always beat out non-HSW cars by default. Now, HSW cars can be enabled or disabled on the fly in regular races, allowing for the normal, fully upgraded non-HSW version of a vehicle to be used, which is why I test both of them and treat them as separate vehicles throughout my testing program. But in addition to all of that, all HSW cars can actually be raced together in HSW races. It essentially acts like a secondary class in the same way that Tuners does, for example, bringing together cars that are in different primary classes like Sports, Muscle, Sports Classics, etc. Although it's not as convenient as racing something like Tuners, because a track does have to be made specifically separately for HSW cars, rather than just cycling through the class list in a race to HSW like you can with Tuners. There are also subclasses for HSW races, with HSW Tier 1 being for coupes and compacts, HSW Tier 2 being for SUVs, muscle cars and sports classics, and HSW Tier 3 containing sports cars, supercars and motorcycles. Now, the tiers listed here in this video are based on the class for HSW races being set to all, allowing all HSW cars to race with each other regardless of what their primary class is. We've already seen some really quick cars, with the new Euros topping the coupes class for lap time, the Brioso and DiNmiTe doing the same for the compacts and SUVs classes respectively, and the all-muscle E tier basically containing the top 3 fastest muscle cars for both lap time and top speed. Tier D is where we see some absolute classics, with big lap time and top speed improvements for the old Banshee and Sterling GT, and this is really where HSW shone in those early days of its introduction, especially with the Banshee, which, it went from a car that was a middling sports car to right on the top pace for the sports class. You could argue that, for something like the Sterling GT, which was already towards the top of the Sports Classics class, it didn't need the HSW to make it even quicker. It basically just created a brand new tier up at the top of Sports Classics anyway. But, bringing life into these older cars was definitely a lot better, and I'll talk more about that later on. The Entity MT has the highest top speed for the Supers class, despite being held back for lap time with inheriting all the horrible advanced handling flags from the Entity XXR that it was copied from, and topping Tier D is the best car for the off-roads class with the Monstrosity, and that's now 5 classes where the fastest car for racers has been an HSW car. And that pattern is going to continue for the 4 remaining classes, starting with the Turismo Classic for Sports Classics in Tier C, meaning that of all 9 classes that have cars with HSW upgrades, it's an HSW car that sits on the top spot for both lap time and top speed in every single one. The only classes that don't have an HSW car in first place are those classes without HSW cars at all, the most notable of which being the sedans class, but it's a very short list including sort of vans and, you know, open wheel utility stuff like that. It goes without saying that that was always going to be the case for the top speed, since, you know, that's what HSW cars are known for, but it hasn't always been true for lap time. For example, it took the recent release of the Euros to dethrone the top non-HSW car in the coupes class. The fastest HSW car for top speed is the stupidly named Italy GTO Stinger TT, which is the only one to break the 160 mph barrier and almost hits 170. It's just a huge top speed that, but unfortunately it's in a car where it's got really floaty and inconsistent handling, which really does make it a handful in a racing situation or even general free roam driving situation. And then when we come to tier B, the DiNmiTe sits on its own here, not having enough grip for the A tier, but also having too much lap time for the C tier really. But something that I found interesting when making this video and putting it together is that within the HSW cars as a whole, and apart from the DiNmiTe, there's actually some really interesting and close tiers with multiple different cars in them, the joint largest of which is the A tier with 4 cars here separated by less than a second around the lap and containing the top 2 sports and supers class cars. Honestly, I think the most interesting class or tier to race with is the G tier with 4 very different cars from 4 different classes, all separated by less than 0.4 of a second. Go back to the start of the video if you want to remind yourself on what's in there, with the D tier probably being a close second. As for the A tier though, which is basically the top tier if you're only considering cars, 3 out of the 4 here are actually outside of the top 10 for top speed. Instead, we've got the La Carouse, which uses its immense grip, while the Cyclone 2 uses its incredible acceleration, and the overall straight line speeds of those cars are enough, along with everything else, to put them in the top tier, despite not being amazing on their own. The same can't be said for our second fastest HSW car though, with the new Niobe. Only behind the Stinger TT for top speed by about 10 mph, and only 1/10 of a second behind the fastest HSW car for lap time. It could certainly be argued that this is the best all-rounder across all cars in the game. It certainly drives really nicely, and I'd argue that due to the top speed that it has, it requires a little bit less effort to get the lap time out of it in comparison to our number 1 car of the weaponized Ignis, which really needs you to utilize its great grip and acceleration to the maximum in a similar fashion to the La Carouse and the Cyclone 2, with it having just enough top speed to put it all together, despite not being that great all on its own in terms of top speed. 145 mph for its top speed is, you know, good enough for 3rd place in supers, but when it comes to the HSW class, it's only in 12th place, and there's a lot of vehicles that break 150 mph. It's just that the weaponized Ignis is just great everywhere else, but you've got to really utilize that grip that it has and to maximize its performance. But the top S tier contains only 1 vehicle, and it's not even a car, with the HSW Hakucho Drag, 3 seconds a lap faster than anything else, and with a top 5 top speed for HSW vehicles. As long as you don't fall off it, you're going to be going seriously quick on this thing. But, you know, as we see some of the comparisons at the end of this video between some of the top cars side by side and also some of the top cars versus the very worst cars, I think, you know, I will continue to lament and mourn the death of older cars receiving the HSW treatment. In the early days of the introduction of HSW, we got things like the Banshee, Sentinel XS, Sterling GT, Brioso RA, DiNmiTe, Turismo Classic, and of course the Hakucho Drag, breathing new life into older cars, as things like the Banshee, for example, went from a middling sports car, like I said earlier, to getting a huge top speed and suddenly becoming relevant for racers again, and that was great to see. But since those initial cars, we've had a grand total of 0 older cars being given HSW upgrades. Instead, Rockstar changed their focus to add HSW upgrades to new cars seemingly at random, increasing the cost for those upgrades even further than what they were when they originally released as well, and they were already expensive, basically an attempt to add more money required for the new best machinery. For example, the Niobe costs 1.9 million to buy, but the hidden cost for the HSW upgrade is 1.8 million, meaning that in reality the car's total price, if you want it to be going as fast as it can, is $3.7 million. Obviously, Rockstar felt that it was more profitable to give new cars exorbitant HSW upgrades rather than give those still expensive HSW upgrades to older stuff, which is kind of something that I don't really understand, and I never have since they changed that, because the whole original concept was just a big win-win, I thought anyway. You know, older fan favourite cars got a burst of speed and brought them back into relevancy, while Rockstar got to charge an extra price for pre-existing cheap cars. Basically being able to, you know, newly monetize old content. It felt like a win-win. It felt like you know, how could they not do that? Because it's so easy. They don't have to even make new cars for it. They can just take older cars and charge an extra price for them. But the real kick in the balls, in addition to that, is that new cars don't even need HSW upgrades. You know, they're new cars, they're a blank slate before release, so they can be made as fast as Rockstar want them to be, straight out of the gate. A perfect example of that is the recent Castigator SUV, which is right on the top pace alongside the HSW SUVs, despite not having HSW upgrades. But as with most things we've seen with GT Online over the last 10 years, it's always good idea, bad execution. It's just a real shame, I think, that HSW went the way of so many other things in this game and was turned into a bit of an insidious, unnecessary, hidden cash cow for shiny new content rather than bringing value and new life into pre-existing content. And that's not to mention that still none of this is available on PC, of course. But, you know, that's Rockstar these days, and that's everything for this video. Please consider supporting on Patreon or become a YouTube member if you want to support this work and get some extra perks for doing so, such as early access to videos and other testing results. And remember to read the description for more info, comment with your thoughts, like the video if you enjoyed it, found it helpful, and subscribe for more. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.